Now, periods of calm have been few and far between in Iraq. For 8 years in the 1980s, the country was at war with Iran. 2 years later, Saddam Hussein sparked the first Gulf conflict. And more recently, Islamic State group militants seized vast swathes of land before they were defeated. In perspective, today we're joined on set by Feurat Alani, a Franco-Iraqi journalist who's used this very troubled backdrop to weave together a new graphic novel and an animated TV series about his upbringing called Parfum d'Iraq, which will soon be broadcast here on France 24. Thank you for coming in to talk to us.
Thank you.
Now, this book, from what I can tell, or from what I've read, is a total sensory experience. You really managed to put the reader in Iraq over the last 30 years. How did you put this book together?
The idea was actually to give another picture, another approach about Iraq that is only depicted by war, violence, death. I had the chance to go to Iraq when I was 9 years old in '89 and to see a totally different country. So that's what I wanted to tell, to give another picture.
And the style of writing is quite different to what you'd normally find in a graphic novel. It's very bullet point, it's tweets, it's very staccato. Was that intentional?
It was intentional because in 2016 I was, fed up, sorry to put it like this, but with all the news about Iraq that are really cold, about numbers, about death, and especially on Twitter. So the idea was to give details and sensory memory about a country that for me was marvelous at that time.
Now, we've had a string of political graphic novels published in the past. I can mention probably Waltz with Bashir, Persepolis. Some might say that this is just a way of trying to cover up the horrors of conflict or of dictatorship. Would you agree?
Not really. To be honest, we have to tell all the stories. So when it's war and violence and death, we have to say it. But the thing is, especially on the news, it's not fair to have only one side. When I'm describing the Iraq that I saw in '89, then during the embargo, I'm not describing a perfect Iraq, not at all. It's an Iraq that I lived and that has to be countered in all the news about this country. So I have to say the other side of the country, and I had the opportunity to go there, so I have to describe this side.
I want to briefly talk about the illustrations in the novel. It's a very simple palette of pale greens and dark purples. Talk us through how you work with the illustrator to put this your picture of Iraq together.
So Leonard Cohen didn't go to Iraq at all, but he was interested by the story and especially the tweets that he has read in 2016. The idea was to give a balance between the very specific and sensory memory that I had and another approach by his drawings with a very, how can I put it, didactical way to describe by the picture things that we cannot really describe, like memories, like dreams of the country. So his idea was to give a good balance between them.
Now, as we see in the book and in the TV series, you were just 9 years old when you went to Iraq first. Of course, you were brought up here in Paris. What has shocked or surprised you the most about Iraq since you've been working and living there?
In '89, I had all the cliches about Iraq. For me, Iraq was a country with Alibaba, the camels, the sands, and I discovered a very modern country, to be honest, at that time. From the airport to the streets to the restaurants to my family. Then, with the years coming and the blockades, I saw a country falling apart. And that was a huge shock for me because I just discovered my country. I was born in Paris and I was born with the idea of a very far away country, and that was the saddest moment for me when I saw the country falling apart.
Have you therefore found it difficult to feel completely Iraqi, given that you were brought up here in Paris and you went to Iraq just on holiday?
It was difficult because at that time Iraq was really closed. It was very difficult for Iraqis to travel, and for them I was France by myself. They used to ask questions about France, about the world in general. So I felt at that time really guilty about it because I was born in Paris. For me it was something that I had to carry.
But of course, the tale that you tell as a child is very different to I would imagine, the tale that lots of children living in Iraq through this would have suffered when you were obviously coming back and forth from Paris.
Exactly. I was a privileged kid at that time. I have a very specific anecdote about shoes that I was wearing, which were really expensive for Iraqis. And when they saw my shoes, one of them tried to exchange his car with my shoes. And I was 12 years old. And it was something that really was sad, and I was shocked by it.
And of course, towards the end of the book, we see you grow from a child to becoming a journalist, working in Iraq for many French papers and TV stations. What made you choose that path to becoming a journalist?
You know, I didn't know it at that time, but I was already a journalist. I used to go to Iraq. It was something exceptional in France. And when I used to come back with my classmates, I used to tell stories about the country. And then later, when I understood that this was a job called journalist, I tried to do it, and I did it.
Now, Iraq has, of course, seen near continual conflict for about 4 decades now, I would say. As a nation, what impact has that had, both physically and psychologically, on the people there, in your view?
To be very specific, my cousins, who, like me, were born in the 80s, were born in the war, during the war, and they only knew their country with war and blockades. So what I see now, especially with the new generation of kids who were born in 2003, their view about life is completely different. For them, it's really normal to have helicopters in the sky, to see weapons, to see militias in the streets. It's something that will have an impact on a social issue, on a social side, and it's something really sad for the country.
But through your work as a journalist, you must have spoken to countless Iraqis based there. What's the general view in Iraq about this troubled past?
The view, honestly, is that all the hope that the Iraqi had about the liberation of the country, a day after the fall of the regime, was completely lost. And for them, they just want now to get peace. What they ask is something really basic that we don't have yet in Iraq: electricity, water, things like this. They just want to live a normal life. That's just what they ask.
Now, the West has, of course, played a key role in this turbulent history. What's your take on that help, or that potentially that interference in your country's recent history?
The thing is, on the Iraqi side, to see Western politics trying to fix things in Iraq is something that they lost the trust about it. And they don't have any hope anymore about this. They want to do it themselves, and to have Iraqi politicians who understand their requests. So it's something we hopefully will have in the coming years, hopefully.
Now, you've now obviously published this book. There's a TV series that's been broadcast on Arte. It's about to be broadcast here on France 24 in January. But what does the future hold for you? Will you be mixing journalism and graphic novels again in the future to tell another story?
It's a very interesting way to tell a story. I think we have to renew ourselves when you, especially when you go to these kind of countries. Today is very, unfortunately, common to hear about war. And my goal now is to humanize the conflict, is to give a very specific and subjective approach. And I think we don't have to get any fear about this. We have to say the thing as we see it. And that's why I want to do it again.
Okay, Feurat Alani, thank you very much for coming in to talk to us here on France 24. And just a reminder, you can of course watch Feurat's animated TV series Le Parfum d'Iraq in the new year. That's in our Middle East Matters programme from the 8th of January here on France 24.